You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Monday. Welcome back to Unscripted Ohio, brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. I am your host, Kyle Lamb, and today I am with publisher extraordinaire Kevin Noon. Got a lot to cover today. We are obviously going to talk about this whole saga, the Urban Meyer suspense, if you will. Will he or won't he be terminated? We'll get into that here in just a second. Also, later on, Andy Anders will be on, our Buckeye Grove intern. We're going to get into what happened at practice on Saturday, as the media was able to observe portions of the practice. So he'll join us, and we'll talk about what he saw and some of his observations. And Brett McMurphy is not the only hated guy in Columbus right now. Anthony Precourt has long been making a run for that mark here. It looks like Austin will have a stadium. I will talk briefly later on in the show about what that means for the city of Columbus and the Crew SC. But let's get into all of this urban stuff. Kevin, thanks for joining me. And there's so much to cover in this because there's so many moving parts and people are just on the edge of their seats waiting to see what will happen here.
Yeah, exactly. I think with the media, we've all been waiting for it to be over too, just because it's been hard for us to really get into covering the team because there's so many questions as to who's going to be in what position at what point and everything else. And I think every point that we think, all right, we think we know everything that's going on, some new salacious details come out or whatnot, and I think it's been difficult for a lot of people out there to separate what's been important to the case and what's just superfluous noise.
And we did have a lot of noise over the weekend, more, for lack of a better description, tabloid journalism, and that's what I would call it. It's tabloid reporting. But we're talking about stuff of a sexual nature being shipped to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, allegedly by Zach Smith, and all of this stuff. Let's just get brass tacks here. It really has no bearing on the case. That's your opinion as well as mine, right?
Right. I mean, I guess the only thing I would sit there and say is that, maybe the one side is just trying to prove some sort of hypersexualized type of environment in the football offices or things like that. But I mean, I'm having a hard time buying into that myself. And it just really does seem like, the ugliest of divorces is just playing out in front of the, all too eager public. And unless you're an Ohio State fan, you're not eager for any of this. But, it's playing out in this public setting. And we're getting a lot of stuff that, really is just professionally should not be thrown out there. I mean, I'm not even talking about the questions of how the information was gathered or anything like that. It's just tawdry. It's just tawdry.
So I want to kind of reset what we know, and then Kevin and I will get into what we think it means and what we think will happen after that. But let's start at the top. So here's what we know. According to a press release coming from Ohio State on Friday. So basically we know they should be wrapping up the investigation on Sunday. So as you're listening to this, they'll probably already be done with the investigation. Then it's going to be up to the panel to finalize a report which will be sent to the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Trustees will announce an executive session, and they have to give 24 hours notice to go into executive session. So we know the clock won't start for at least 24 hours until they announce that. And then once they go into executive session, they will consult with President Michael Drake, and they will decide what they're going to do and then announce it. So Kevin, here's what people have been talking about, and I've been doing my best to explain the confusing nature of this, who is actually making the decision. And the way the press release states that it is Michael Drake in consultation with the board. But the way I understand it is that the board could theoretically make the decision themselves if they wanted to. And my read on this, and I want you to give your opinion on whether you agree with this, my read is the fact that they are letting Drake make the official announcement, make the official decision, tells me that they're trying to present a unified front in whatever their findings are in this whole case.
Well, yeah, because I think what's going to happen is if one way or the other, nobody's going to. I mean, there's going to be people that are going to be happy with this. If Ohio State does not punish Urban Meyer, or it's very minimal, one side's going to be upset. If it's the other way around, there's going to be a side that's going to be upset there too. If you sit there and you dot all your I's and you cross all your T's and you go through the process and each step and lay it out. I mean, it's I'm no attorney, but you want to make sure when you go through this this first time around that you don't leave anything up there to be scrutinized later. So go through all the steps, go through the board of trustees and the meetings and President Drake being involved and everything else there, and then just batten down the hatches at that point.
I know we've had this discussion, and I think we're in agreement on this. We can't guarantee what Ohio State is going to do, but it's going to be a bad idea to hold a press conference as far as the mode of delivery here, right? I mean, a press conference is just a horrible idea for a number of reasons.
Yeah, there was also a little press conference in Chicago at Big Ten Media Days that really opened this Pandora's box in a lot of ways with, Meyer and McMurphy and how questions were answered or not answered. I just think that there's just, professionally speaking, as a member of the media, I'd love to have a press conference just because it's an opportunity to be able to get immediate feedback by asking questions. But, I think that if I were in charge of crisis management, I sure as heck would not have a press conference. That's just asking for trouble, and you're just asking for major media outlets to come in here and try and trip people up. And Ohio State doesn't necessarily have the greatest track record in the world either in terms of these types of things. We don't want another E. Gordon Gee, I just hope he doesn't fire me type of situation.
Yeah, and if people are out there listening, like here's my stance on this, and I want to explain why I think a press conference is a bad idea. If you have a press conference, you can have everything go well, you can put out the findings you want, but all it takes is one question where you slip up and say something incorrectly. Like Kevin just mentioned, look, Urban Meyer may have been completely truthful in Chicago, but because of the way he answered the question, it looks like he was completely lying, and it got us into all this mess. And if that happens one single time on one question, it basically undoes everything you've done, all your findings, all of your presentation. It all goes out the window. That's why I think the only way to go here is to issue a press release. You sternly word it. You put out the bullet points and the facts you want known. You issue the report along with it as a public disclosure, and then you're done. You shape the narrative. You don't allow the media to take the narrative from you.
Right. I mean, and the questions will be asked even if there's not a press conference, and I'm sure that at available press opportunities moving forward, I mean, it's going to be on athletic communications to really try and wrangle everything to keep it on football and whatnot. I mean, I was there once, not to mix stories up or anything, but I was there once Kevin Wilson was hired by Ohio State, and just how he was released from Indiana with the allegations of treating players poorly. And the first opportunity that we finally got to speak to Kevin Wilson, that four-letter network was there, and they were firing away, asking questions, trying to dictate the media opportunity. So yeah, they just need to make sure that they're able to do things on their own terms, and I don't think that as soon as they come to any ruling or thing like that, that it would be in their best interest to have a press conference. I mean, we see a much more public type of opportunities out there go awry way too easy, and the track record has just not been very good here.
I want to kind of quell some fears because I know there are a lot of people fretting whether Michael Drake will be making the decision or the board, and it kind of goes back to, technically speaking, it's going to be Drake's decision, at least officially speaking. But I want to basically emphasize that I don't think this decision is going to happen without the consent of the board, and here's why. Let's just say, for sake of argument, that Drake wants to go rogue and he wants to fire Urban because of perception or whatever the case may be. And this, of course, is under the assumption that protocol was observed, which we haven't established for a fact, but let's just assume for the sake of argument that it has been. Even if Drake wanted to do that, you're basically creating a scenario where the board would have to come up with $38 million to pay Urban because they're not firing him without cause. And they're not firing him with cause, I should say. So to anybody worried about Drake going off the reservation and making his own decision, Kevin, I assume you agree here. There's no way the board is going to allow him to go off the reservation and make that kind of a choice to where they would have to pay $38 million to fire him. That just doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean, when you look at the annual endowment of Ohio State, I mean, 38 million may not be a lot of money, but it really is not chump change either. And I just can't imagine that they would get into a situation of where they would, go to bed one night thinking that one thing's going to happen, and then, the exact opposite happens, when with one person going absolutely rogue, as you put it. So I can't see that. I mean, I think that the board will give their stance and work with President Drake at that point to make sure everybody is on the same page and go from there. But again, I never thought we would be talking about people's Amazon shopping habits and things along those lines. So I'm never say never, especially in this case.
Yeah, I mean, we've gone down a path I don't think we've ever seen before. Not to this extent, this level. I mean, we're talking about things that when all this started on July 23rd, I never dreamed we would be talking about some of the things we've talked about. It's absolutely insane. I mean, we're talking about reports on Facebook. We're talking about sex toys being delivered. It is just incredible the level of discussion that we've had about this, and we're not even talking about all the Herman allegations, and that's a whole other side drama of this. But okay, so Kevin, I want to ask you, what is your take on how this is going to play out?
Well, I've gone round and round on this, and I think within the first couple of days that things happened before we really were able to know a lot of the details, it just seemed like things were going to go poorly for Urban Meyer, and I really had little faith that things were going to go right. I did a lot of national radio at that point, and don't believe for a second that national radio hosts had not already made up their mind in the situation. But I think once I got out of that 48-hour window, I started to look at the evidence a little bit more and think about it on a large scale, and I started to feel a lot better about the chances that Ohio State would retain Urban Meyer, maybe again with a financial penalty or something along those lines. And I'm going to admit that the news that came out on Friday from Brett McMurphy about the sex toys and so on and so forth threw me for a little bit of a loop. I mean, I think it was just such a Hail Mary in certain aspects that I really it took me a while to get my thoughts clear again. I'm like, well, here we go again. I mean, while this doesn't have anything to do with anything, it's just the type of salacious details of, embarrassing type of things that you might have people who are, non-athletics people making decisions about athletics may just say, $38 million is a small price to pay to cut bait and run or whatever. But I would say as at the time that we're recording this, and I think that Urban Meyer will be fine. Again, I could see a financial penalty. I could definitely see some education opportunities for the coaching staff, for the entire athletics department, all the way from coaches to athletes themselves. But when it's all said and done, if I had to make my pick right now, I think Urban Meyer will coach in 2018 at Ohio State.
I am also going to go on record. A lot of people have been asking what I think, and I'm going to be blunt here. I think that Urban Meyer will be coaching in 2018. I don't think he's going to face a suspension. I don't think if you're going to say that he didn't that he followed protocol, then there's no reason for a suspension. I think that looks bad. Then you'd have to ask the question, well, why are you suspending him if he followed protocol? So I don't think they're going to go down that road. But I do think Urban Meyer will be coaching, and I'm going to issue a little wiggle room and a little caveat at the end of this. But I will say the reason I think this is I really believe, and I wrote this in a column last week on Buckeye Grove, I think that they had ample opportunity to find out protocol was observed. And I believe that this whole thing is mostly PR. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a chance that they look at some of the details of the report and determine that something else was amiss here. But I think they went into this knowing protocol was observed, but they wanted to put it in the hands of an independent panel, come back with the facts and findings, make sure there's nothing they're missed, be thorough. And at the end of this, the expectation and the plan was to reinstate Urban Meyer. Now, the caveat, of course, is, like I said, I mean, they're going through all these interviews. They interviewed Courtney Smith. They interviewed apparently some other former staff members. We won't get into the details of that, but it looks like they're very detailed in this, and there could be some stuff we don't know about. So I'm not going to say there's no chance Urban Meyer will be fired, but I think they went into this expecting to find protocols observed, and I think they knew that. And so I think that's why details have been quiet. I think if there were any chances if they had already determined they were going to fire him, we would have heard about that, because you can't keep that a secret. So I think the plan is that he will be reinstated, barring any bombshells that we haven't heard about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I guess I'd want to use that same caveat as well of, if there are things that we haven't heard about, because people have gone to me, it's like, well, you've had to have heard something. I'm like, no, and it's not even like that there's a gag order in place, because it's definitely need to know, and so few people need to know what's going on in the midst of the investigation that nobody really has the information at this point. I mean, I'm sure there are little bits and pieces that we've heard this or we've heard that, but just based on what the investigation was supposed to be on at that point, and if you take Meyer's statement at even at half face value that he did inform the athletic director Gene Smith, I have a hard time believing that there would be any sort of punishment in place at that point. But if you never want to have an investigation going on inside an organization, because it generally what happens is you find 3 other things that you weren't looking for. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if they do find something else that that maybe we're not talking about because we don't know about it or something along those lines, yeah, you just don't know.
Yeah, that's the other aspect of this, and you and I have discussed it a lot. It's people really are not talking. I mean, the most I've been able to get out of anybody that I talk to is just some procedural issues. Like they'll drop, well, this is the plan on how we're going to handle this or how we're going to handle that. That's the most I've been able to get out of anybody. And the funny thing is, anybody else I talk to that normally would have some kind of insight is the same way. There just is nobody that I know of that is actually talking about what is going on with the investigation itself.
Yeah, I like to feel like I'm pretty well sourced at times on situations, but this one has been pretty hard to come by any information. I mean, as I said, you hear some things, but even at that point, you sit there and you're like, well, I really need to consider the source, because we've really entered the theater of the observed with some of the information that's come out that's been pertinent or really not pertinent to this whole thing. That I think it really creates a culture of where you have to sit there and completely vet everything that you're hearing. Like, generally you want to source something 2 different ways. Well, I'm feeling like I have to source things 4 or 5 different ways, because there's just so much misinformation that's being thrown out there right now.
This case is going to be, I don't want to say it's going to be a lesson on how to handle things, but it's just a good reminder. There's really not much good talking to the media sometimes. I mean, look at the firestorm that has been created with how Urban addressed this, and he could have been, like I said earlier, he may have very well have been truthful in how he was answering, but it just goes to show we're in a society right now that just wants to latch on to anything, and it's scary how quickly this spread. It was a real firestorm.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the Tattoo Gate stuff came out, through 2010, and how that kind of started through the internet. I mean, it was very different internet culture then at that point 8 years ago, but it spread quickly too, and it's that much crazier now here in 2018, and it's just going to be harder and harder to be able to differentiate between actual reporting and maybe some of this, gonzo on the fly reporting that we're seeing that's going on, as well now. I mean, without getting into any, big picture issues, it definitely makes you kind of have to reevaluate how media does its job.
Well, we are now on our seats. We're on the clock waiting for an official answer from Ohio State. That should come in the next couple of days, maybe as soon as Tuesday. Who knows for sure, but we will definitely watch, and we'll absolutely report on anything that comes out on BuckeyeGrove.com. Kevin Noon, you can catch him on Twitter at Kevin_Noon. Kevin, thanks for sharing your insights and opinions on this, and hopefully we can stop talking about this very soon.
Absolutely. Looking forward to September 1st, and where we're going to really be talking about football, hopefully at that point, but who knows?
Speaking of football, let's get into that with Andy Anders. All right, Andy, we're going to jump right in here. You had the opportunity to see, albeit not as long a practice as you would like, but you did get to see about 20, 30 minutes on Saturday. Let's start first with just the tone of the practice. What would you describe the players and how they were doing? I mean, did you feel like they were engaged? What was the atmosphere like with the camp the excitement level of camp?
Well, I feel like the attitude that Urban Meyer brought to Ohio State, it's still his mentalities that are being applied, of course, even if he's not there, is this high energy, always competing, always going style of practice of play. And I feel like that hasn't left at all. It was very clear the way the coaches were interacting with the players and the way they had motivational stuff being announced over a PA system. They'd be talking to guys on a loudspeaker like, strain Malik, strain Okuda. Like, strain seemed to be the popular word. I think the place where I saw the most energy actually was maybe with the receivers group. They were all jumping around after drills, and Hartline was really getting those guys fired up, it looked like, which is nice to see. So, yeah, it felt very high energy, very engaged.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. When you posted that, the observations on the Horseshoe Lounge on BuckeyeGrove.com, the quote strain you were mentioning, it seems like, it's hard to say. I mean, that could mean a bunch of different things, but I feel like there's got to be some motivation from the coaches that are there running the practice. Ryan Day and Greg Schiano and Kevin Wilson on each side of the ball. I feel like they're definitely using this Urban situation as motivation as well. You know that they're playing that to their advantage with trying to keep the guys motivated and psyched up, and probably using this negative media attention as motivation as well.
Right, bulletin board material.
Yeah, absolutely, bulletin board material. That's the best way to put it. So you mentioned Brian Hartline, and he seems to be a very intense guy from the videos I've seen of him practice so far. And what was your impression of him, getting to see him instruct the receivers?
Well, exactly that. He's very intense, almost Kerry Combs level, maybe not quite that intense, but it was a lot of in-your-face shouting and really just hyping up. He seems like a guy whose style of motivation is more to build guys up, really point out the good things a player does. Whenever I see him on video, and the short time I got to witness his style of coaching yesterday, after every big catch in the drills, they were jumping around. I really like that style of coaching, and I think that fits in well with a position like receiver, where it's a very flashy position. So, yeah.
Who are the receivers that maybe stood out to you in the short time that you got to watch?
Man, Johnny Dixon has been looking good to me. Again, they were kind of off in the corner from where we were standing. Obviously, the media is all herded behind one red line on that field, and they were at the far left corner of one field. I mainly just was able to see them jumping around and getting excited, but I think I saw a couple nice things from Johnny Dixon. Paris, as always, looks just like an athletic freak. Paris Campbell, that is.
Anytime Paris touches the ball, you're always you're holding your breath, just waiting to gasp for him to take it to the house. So he's definitely an exciting player. Mm-hmm. You mentioned in your report that the three players you saw, DeMario McCall, KJ Hill, and CJ Saunders, were the three guys taking punts. Did you have a chance to see any kick returns in the time you saw?
No, I didn't. Okay,
because I thought it was interesting that I think I saw somewhere, and I don't remember where, and I'm sorry that I can't credit the person. I thought I saw that Paris was not out there with kick returns, was interesting. But did you see any chance to see the punt returns? Did you see anybody taking more reps than another, or was it just kind of like, switch them out one by one?
It seemed like KJ and DeMario were the two main guys. CJ, the order they went in, they rotated, but the order they went in was KJ, DeMario, and CJ in that order, 1, 2, 3, which sounds to me like that would make sense as the starting depth chart considering KJ returned punts last year. But there was no clear, like they would shout ones for the punt team, but then they'd be in a different spot on the rotation for the return guys. So there was no clear indication as this is the number one guy, this number two guy. It was just the order they rotated in went KJ Hill, Demario McCall, CJ Saunders.
So on the offensive line, I thought this was interesting. You said the starters on Saturday, at least in the time you got to see, were Josh Alibi at left tackle, Malcolm Pridgham left guard, Michael Jordan at center, and that's something I want to discuss with you because that's interesting there. Demetrius Knox and Isaiah Prince on the right side. Now, you did say that Brady Taylor and Thayer Munford were not out there on Saturday, which could obviously have an impact at who was out there. I'm curious your take from what you saw of Michael Jordan up front. You know, there's been a lot of question whether he's going to stay at center, whether he's going to beat out Brady Taylor. I know the presumption coming into camp was Brady Taylor would be the starter. What's your feeling, your gut instinct on what you saw on Saturday as far as that battle?
The coaches are going to do what they need to do to get the best 5 offensive linemen on the field, and that's been clear in the past. They were the section where they had the number 1 offensive line out there. They were just walking through plays, so I didn't get a sense of how good anyone was at any of the positions. I think he snapped it well, what I saw, but again, they were just walking through. That's not the same as going full speed in a game, of course.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Continue.
No. But moving to left guard to center has definitely worked in the past for Ohio State, last 2 years with Elflein and Price. So I think if the 5 best out there involves moving Jordan to center so you can get a guy like Malcolm Pridgeon at guard, if Brady Taylor doesn't beat him out at the center spot, then that's what you got to go with.
Yeah, I have a feeling, and I'm guessing here, so I hope nobody reads into this too much. But I would think, I think Jordan has got so much physical talent. I think that Ohio State's offensive line, if Jordan can make that transition, I feel like Ohio State's offensive line is potentially better with Jordan at center. That's just my read on it. Like you said, with Elflein and Price, that wound up being a great call for Ohio State, and I think that's what we're going to see here. So one last thing here that I want to talk to you about before we let you go, Andy. I thought this was interesting. You mentioned Tough Borland. Talk about what you saw from him in his time out there.
It was originally Kevin Noon who pointed it out to me, our dear publisher. But he was running through drills with the linebackers, which, I mean, can only be a good sign, right? Him rehabbing his Achilles injury. I think might be the most important player on that linebacking core this season, and it's important to have him back to full strength ahead of the big games like Penn State or even TCU, though I doubt he'll be back in time for that game. It's a lot of rehab with an Achilles tear, but he was out there going through drills at full speed with the linebackers. I hope they're not rushing him back. I don't think they are. They don't tend to do that, but to see him out there running at full speed is a great sign for the Ohio State defense because he has the look of the classic A.J. Hawk, James Laurinaitis, Andy Katzenmoyer, those real run-stopping, true middle linebackers. I think he's going to have a stud season this year, and last year you saw a glimpse. So.
Yeah, I definitely think it's interesting. I talked about it with Bill Bender last week, and it just seems like Tough Borland is way ahead of schedule, I think, where anybody expected. I mean, I don't think there's any illusion he's going to be out there on September 1st here 2 weeks from now, but I think that he's going to be back sooner rather than later, and it'll be interesting to see how they handle that with the rest of the linebackers when Borland gets back. Anyhow, Andy Anders, he is one of our Buckeye Grove interns. You can catch him on Twitter at UniotoTank55. Andy, thanks for taking time out of your schedule and get us up to speed with what you saw on Saturday.
Thanks for having me.
As we wrap up the show today with the Buckeye Beat, we're actually going to take a diversion from Ohio State football and Ohio State basketball. We're going to talk a little bit Crew. We'll call this the Crew SC Beat for today. I just want to mention this one story because some of you are probably Crew fans. Last Thursday, as you may know, the Austin City Council approved a potential $200 million soccer-only stadium in the city of Austin. And this, of course, would potentially relocate the Crew to Austin with that stadium being approved. However, I will say, and just one quick thing here before, I'm going to get into pre-court for a second, but before I say that, I do want to make this clear. For those of you following, or even if you're not following but you're interested, this doesn't necessarily mean the death of the Columbus Crew. It doesn't mean it's going to be the Austin Crew, because while it does appear that this lays the foundation for Anthony Precourt to have a team, an MLS team in the city of Austin, it is still very possible, and I would say maybe even probable, that Columbus would keep a team. What I think this would end up being is potentially a Columbus or a Cleveland Browns situation where Austin would get their own team, the franchise would technically move, but the colors and the name would stick with Columbus, and it would be the Columbus Crew as an expansion franchise. I think that's what's going to happen here. The city of Columbus is doing great. Look, the Save the Crew movement, hashtag Save the Crew, they've got over 11,000 pledges for season tickets for next year for a Columbus team that is in Columbus under new ownership. And that means there are a lot of people in a short amount of time that says, yeah, I'll rally behind the Crew if they stay in Columbus with new ownership. So the Save the Crew membership, or the Save the Crew group came out with a potential plan to build a new stadium in downtown Columbus over in the Nationwide Arena District. There's a lot of positive movement here. I think Columbus, even if Austin goes forward with building this stadium and Precourt gets a team there, I don't think it's the death of the Crew. I think that there are some talks with the Columbus Partnership Group and MLS to relocate a team to Columbus, and I think that's going to wind up being an expansion franchise, and I really do think the hashtag Save the Crew movement will work when this is all said and done, and the city of Columbus will get a brand new shiny stadium somewhere in a downtown location, hopefully over there in that empty warehouse spot behind the ballpark and back behind Nationwide Boulevard. So we'll see what happens here. But I just wanted to get that, just wanted to mention that despite the news of Austin approving a stadium, it doesn't mean the death of the Crew. It doesn't mean that all hope is lost. I do think Columbus will get an expansion franchise, even if Precourt gets his Austin franchise. Look, Precourt, by the way, a snake. He is up there in the running. If not for Brett McMurphy right now, with all this stuff and reporting with the Ohio State situation, Anthony Precourt would be enemy numero uno in Columbus, because that guy is a real snake. It's clear he had no intention of ever keeping the team in Columbus. He got the franchise, took it over from MLS as the operator, and it was clear all along this guy wanted to go to Austin. He floated out in 2016 the idea of a new stadium, but he never actually pursued it. City leaders have said they tried to work with him, and it was clear he just never was serious about the possibility of building a new downtown soccer stadium. So Anthony Precourt, definitely a snake. He's right up there in my mind with Brett McMurphy. And I'm not a hardcore Columbus Crew fan, but I definitely root for them. I support them. I want them to do well. But I think that guy is a real snake, and I say that as objectively as I can, not coming at this as a hardcore Crew fan, because I'm not. But that guy, definite snake, and it is good that he will be leaving the city of Columbus, probably going to Austin. That's fine. If the Crew survives, this will all have been worth it. Columbus will have a new stadium, and they will have gotten rid of that snake, Anthony Precourt. So that's the Crew news I wanted to touch on. The Save the Crew movement is alive and well. This news last week by the City Council of Austin does not mean that Columbus is going to lose a franchise. Anyhow, that is going to do it for the Unscripted Ohio podcast today. Thanks for giving us a listen. Thanks to Andy Anders for his report on Saturday practice, and thanks to my publisher, Kevin Noon of Buckeye Grove, for talking about the situation. We will be following all week long any breaking news here on the Urban Meyer situation, whether he remains coach at Ohio State or whether something goes terribly awry. No matter what, we will be talking about it. Catch me on Twitter at KYLam8. I'll have as many updates as I can. Catch BuckeyeGrove.com. We'll continue to report and monitor the progress. And whenever we have news, I promise we will talk about it. I might even have a special podcast sometime this week. But if not, if it drags until midweek or later this week, then we'll go forward with our usual Friday episode. Catch us on BuckeyeGrove.com Mondays and Fridays. Catch us on the archives, SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll catch you later on this week. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.